Hello and welcome to What's Next for the CIO, Redefining Leadership Roles in the Age of AI. So today's webinar is sponsored by Tynes, produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker with IT Pro, and I'm excited to be your moderator for this webinar. So we've got a lot to cover today, and I can't wait to get started. But first, I want to go over a few housekeeping details that'll help you get the most out of this session. So let's start out in the chat tab over on the right-hand side of your screen. A lot of you have been saying hi in there. It's great to see where you're logging in from. I see a couple of people from California, some Colorado, some Mississippi, Massachusetts, Tampa. That's great. If your state or country seems underrepresented, correct that by giving us a greeting in there. That chat is for all those hellos like that, but you don't have to stop there. You can share your thoughts about today's topics, your reaction to the presentation, your reaction to the discussion that we're going to have, insights, whatever you're excited about. The chat tab is also a good place to go if you need to reach out to the IT Pro team in the unlikely event that you have any technical issues during the session. So a browser refresh will dispose of sort of a lot of different types of tech gremlins, but another thing to try is the light mode option at the bottom of the screen. So that limits some of your functionality, puts you on a slight delay, but it can really help if you're having even local connection problems. And if none of those steps fixes a problem, my colleague Arena and I will be standing by monitoring that chat to help you out. Now, the absolute best way to dive into the information we're going to explore today is by asking questions. So let's take two hops over in the tabs there on the right to the Q&A tab. So while chat is for all those general thoughts and hellos and technical questions, the Q&A area is where you should go to ask a question, for our Q&A portion of the presentation toward the end. That's where we'll look during the Q&A portion for your questions. Now, we do have a lot of information to cover today, and depending on how many questions we get, we may not get to them all during the session. If that's the case for your question, don't worry. We'll make sure to pass along all of your questions to the team from Tynes for follow-up. Now, one other stop on our console tour today is the Docs tab. That's that tab right between chat and Q&A. So we've got a lot of great stuff in there to go along with the webinar. There's a link to register for an upcoming webinar. There's the Forrester study that we're going to be talking about. There's a link to the Tynes blog page, including an entry about the Forrester study. And there's a link to create a free account and start building stuff. So be sure to click around in that doc section and check out some of those resources. Also, be aware that we have closed captioning available in 18 languages. If you hover over the lower part of your screen, you'll see that CC option as well as a drop-down menu for languages. And finally, you may have noticed the prize icon. We are, in fact, giving away an Amazon gift card worth $250 as a prize drawing at the end of our webinar. Now, you must be in attendance for the duration of the live event to qualify for the prize, and you've got to meet the actual tech prize terms and conditions, which you can find in the Docs tab. All right, with all that housekeeping out of the way, I think we're ready to get into our session, and I'm really excited to introduce you all to our expert speaker today. So we've got Brad Rumph, who's Field CTO at Tynes. Brad, welcome.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So I know you're going to present some stuff, and then I'll come back on afterward, and we'll have a conversation about it as well. So I'm going to back seat and listen in.
Sounds good. Well, hi, everyone. I took a quick look at some of you that have joined, so welcome from wherever you're joining from, and to my fellow Coloradans, welcome. I really appreciate everyone taking the time. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what's next for the CIO. And this means really, in the context of redefining leadership roles in the age of AI. And so again, my name is Brad Rumph, and I'm the field CTO at Tynes. I've been in roles as CTO of a few venture-backed startups, as well as a distinguished client architect at big tech companies like Salesforce, where I was a proud member of the MuleSoft team, AWS, and most recently Google Cloud as part of an AI specialist go-to-market team before I joined Tynes. So today we're going to dig into how the CIO role is changing and in the age of AI and what's actually working on the ground, and how to steer AI programs toward measurable business impact with the right guardrails in place. So let's set the agenda so you know exactly where we're headed. So first, we're going to look at how the CIO is evolving from an internal operator to a business strategist. And then second, we're going to cover kind of the new reality for IT as AI accelerates and the orchestration patterns that make AI safe, auditable, and aligned to strategy. And then third, I'll share some findings from some brand new research that we just conducted at Times, and it was sponsored with Forrester Consulting on what's blocking and enabling AI at scale. And finally, we're going to talk about leadership opportunity for CIOs and how to guide your organization with a unified end-to-end approach to AI. So let's start with the role shift that's already underway. So for years, CIOs were challenged with keeping the lights on. Things like uptime, resilience, security, to name a few. But that remit, it's not going away, but it's no longer sufficient. So as AI and digital transformation accelerate, CIOs are becoming business strategists who design for value creation, not just system stability and availability. We're seeing the center of gravity is shifting from cost management to value delivery. And for IT leaders, that means using data, orchestration, and AI to drive outcomes for their organizations. These outcomes can be anything from improved employee experience to things like streamlined operations. So this is where the bilingual CEO emerges. Today's CEO must be fluent in both technology and the business model. And they need to be able to connect initiatives to ROI and board level priorities. I've seen firsthand great technology with not so great business models and vice versa. Equally important is culture. The modern CIO catalyzes a data-driven, change-ready organization. They really embed technology practices across all areas of the enterprise: finance, marketing, HR, operations, and beyond. Last night, I was talking to a good friend of mine. He's a top external candidate to a CIO position for a large rural telco. And one of the things they're most interested in is someone that can build and nourish culture. I'm a firm believer in recruiting top talent, and I believe that's critical, but retaining that top talent is even more important. CIOs are becoming risk and governance leaders for AI. They're establishing ethical frameworks, protecting data privacy, and securing models and pipelines, all while enabling innovation. So I stand behind the last point that I made, as it's validated with this shift with some new research that we ran at Times with Forrester Consulting that just launched last week. And this is where we surveyed more than 400 IT leaders and practitioners globally across all industries. What the data shows is clear. IT's strategic impact is growing, but visibility and alignment with the executive vision often lag. So you can see on the slide, 40% of respondents said lack of business visibility into IT contributions holds IT back at the board level. And 37% cited a disconnect between IT and executive vision. So the work is real, and it isn't just always reflected in the story the board hears. So how do we bridge that gap while shipping AI safely? And that brings us to orchestration and the new reality for IT. We all know AI is moving fast, and expectations on IT are moving even faster. The question isn't whether to use AI, it's how to deploy it in a way that's safe, strategic, and fully auditable. And this is something that I hear in customer conversations on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. Agentic workflows or autonomous systems that act across tools can speed up decisions and execution. But they only work at scale when IT owns the connective tissue. These are things like identity, policy, and orchestration across the entire stack. So that's the lane where IT already leads: identity and access, infrastructure, compliance, and the guardrails that keep systems trustworthy and performant. So now is a great time to talk about the workflow models that we're blending. So what we see on the right-hand side are rules-based workflows, also known as deterministic workflows. These use defined logic, and these produce highly predictable outcomes. These types of flows are perfect when you need everything to be right. So it must be right every time tasks. And an example of this would be things like provisioning and deprovisioning. That could be users, it could be servers, etc. Agentic workflows, which we see at the bottom, or non-deterministic, are dynamic and context aware. They're great for pattern spotting, anomaly triage, or summarizing evidence where judgment and variability matter. Summarization is one of the most powerful capabilities that we've seen LLMs bring to the table. And I've seen this in production settings, and just the amount of time it saves and the amount of costs that are able to be reduced by using summarization. In practice, though, you really need both, composed in a single governed flow with and where human checkpoints are appropriate. So I want to touch on a quick note in terms of our approach at Times. We don't force a single definition of an AI agent. We give teams the flexibility to design agents that match their risk posture, processes, and their tool chain. So that means you can scale execution without sacrificing oversight by tailoring agents to your business and orchestrating them from end to end. Now let's ground this in this latest data from Forrester's report that I mentioned earlier on where IT leaders see the real enablers and the roadblocks when scaling AI. The Forrester Opportunity Snapshot highlights two truths. Respondents emphasize that to lead orchestration across the business, IT needs integrated data and workflow platforms and accessible orchestration tools. 48% pointed to integrated data and workflow platforms as key enablers, and 35% highlighted accessible orchestration as critical to bring more builders into the fold. We also see that teams, they also favor embedding AI into existing workflows rather than wholesale rewrites. And this is an approach that reduces disruption while driving measurable outcomes. So let's zoom out, and the strategic posture is clear. You can see on the slide that nearly half, or 48%, strongly agree that IT is uniquely positioned to orchestrate AI across systems, workflows, and teams. And 35% strongly agree that aligning AI initiatives with enterprise strategy is a top IT priority. So in other words, success isn't about standing up another pilot. It's about embedding AI into existing processes with clear ownership, measurable outcomes, and executive air cover. So to wrap up this session, let's take a look at what this means for CIO leadership over the next decade and how to position your program now. The mandate ahead is to move from gatekeeping to orchestration. And I can't emphasize orchestration enough. That means governing every workflow end to end so AI becomes safe, repeatable, measurable, and auditable. It's not about launching a single agent. It's about aligning people, process, and the platform so every agent-assisted action follows policy and leaves an audit trail. This is also where the CIO and CTO roles converge. The CIO focuses on things like operational excellence and enterprise-wide enablement, where the CTO anchors product and external innovation. But I want to point out that the line between them is blurry, and collaboration is the multiplier. The leaders who will win, one, they're going to be able to translate technical complexity into outcomes that the C-suite values. Things like revenue, risk reduction, and cost efficiency. Two, you've got to balance innovation with compliance and security. In other words, policy by design, not policy by exception. And three, drive organizational change making technology shared responsibility across the business. So to sum it up, the successful technical executive will be someone who shifts from executor to strategic business leader. I want to thank everyone for spending this time with us today, and I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm going to pass it back to you now, Scott.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, there was so much there to dig into. So the first thing you mentioned, that shift from keeping the lights on to becoming a business strategist. So
Yeah.
how should CIOs balance those legacy responsibilities with this new strategic mandate without burning out their teams?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And, not only is it a great question, it's a very common challenge that we see right now in the market. The reality is the foundational responsibilities like uptime, security, and compliance that I spoke of, these aren't going away. And so the shift isn't about piling more on. It's really about reframing how we deliver things. And so what we're seeing work is that CIOs are investing in orchestration to free up capacity, not just for themselves, but for their teams. And it's also about shifting mindsets. Instead of treating keeping the lights on and strategy as two separate jobs, we need to see operational excellence as a strategic leader.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and enabler, I would add.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of leads into something else. You talked a little bit about being a bilingual CIO. What does that really look like in practice?
Well, it's definitely not about speaking multiple foreign languages, but that's my bad dad joke for the day. But when we talk about the bilingual CEO or CIO, we really mean someone who can speak both tech and business with fluency and really connect the two. And this is an age-old adage. I mean, we've been talking about this forever. But it's not just about understanding the latest AI models and cloud platforms. It's really about explaining how those tools impact things like revenue, reduce risk, or even support the company's strategic priorities. In practice, I see this, means a few things. And first, I would think, CIOs need to get closer to the business units and sitting in on go-to-market strategy sessions, partnering with finance or operations or any other, division within the enterprise or organization, and really listening to what success looks like, outside of IT. And that context is what helps translate capabilities into outcomes. On the flip side of that, conversely, it also means making business language a two-way street and bringing technical insights to the C-suite in terms that they care about. I've gotten beaten up and beaten over the head on this for many years and conditioned. We always thought we were measuring the right things, from an IT and from an operations perspective. But the reality of it is, really learn to shift to things that the C-suite and the board, care about. And these are things like metrics like ROI, customer retention, regulatory compliance. And so the value of IT really becomes much more visible, and it's not assumed.
Yeah. Okay. I hope you weren't beaten up too bad.
Not too bad, but it is the truth.
Yeah. So how can current CIOs build that fluency in business and tech simultaneously?
That's another great question. I think, sometimes, it's again the classic, don't boil the ocean, and start small. Shadow your counterparts in other departments. Invite them into early tech conversations. I think most importantly is to co-own a metric or a KPI. This really puts the responsibility on you to be engaged, involved, and have something that you can report on. And I think the more that you operate at that intersection, the more you naturally start connecting dots between innovation and impact.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so you're sort of staying out of you're not letting things get siloed where you're just looking at your own types of metrics. In your view, what's the biggest risk that organizations overlook when they're deploying AI agents across workflows?
Man, Scott, I could take that in a lot of different directions.
Please do.
The biggest risk, that I see organizations is really overlooking is fragmentation without governance. And again, I think I touched on it, earlier in the conversation that, this is something that comes up in conversations that I'm in, I think I mentioned a daily, weekly, kind of monthly basis. And we have a lot of internal conversations around this here at Times. But, it's really tempting, for organizations to roll out AI agents in pockets. And that's one of the questions that we get asked. Different, divisions or orgs within an enterprise are spinning up agents. And how do you wrap your arms around that? And maybe one team is using an agent to triage, tickets. Maybe another is automating, data analysis. But without a unified orchestration layer and clear governance, those efforts become siloed really, really fast. And that creates blind spots. And as we know, that's not a good thing. And I guess furthermore, I'd say the risk isn't just operational, it's strategic and regulatory. And if agents are acting autonomously across tools, but there's no shared framework for identity, access, auditability, and I want to emphasize auditability, all caps, bold, underline, exclamation point. You really lose visibility and control. And this is where we start to see things like data leakage and biased outcomes, or, compliance gaps, which is never a good thing, when those creep in. And it's not because teams are reckless. It's really because, what we say at Times, the connective tissue is missing.
Okay.
Well, the last one more thing that I'll say on that is the biggest risk isn't just deploying AI. It's deploying AI without a plan for scale, safety, and oversight. And orchestration and guide rails, they have to be the backbone. It's an absolute imperative. And really they ensure doesn't matter whether it's a rules-based task or a context-aware agent, every action is traceable, policy aligned, and safe to repeat.
Okay. Great advice there. And also, so I wrote down auditability.
Auditability.
Made a little note there. That's a really good point. So from the research that you conducted with Forrester, what surprised you the most about how IT leaders are thinking about AI?
I think there are definitely some surprises, but that report, and I would encourage everyone in attendance to download it. There's some really good nuggets in there, and for me, it was a lot of validation, about what we're doing here at Times. But I'd say maybe one of the big surprises was the disconnect between IT's strategic focus and how the rest of the business, perceives it. So IT is prioritizing things like securing data, aligning to business objectives and orchestration across systems. But many still feel overlooked because their contributions aren't fully visible. And I touched on that to the board or other departments. That's why it's critical to find the right KPIs and metrics that those audiences are interested in. And it's this fragmentation that I see that's really holding AI back. Things, siloed tools, siloed budgets, siloed priorities. AI isn't failing due to a lack of ambition. There's a ton of energy and excitement in this space. Clearly a ton of learning. But it's really, it's failing because, again, there's no connective tissue. And so the upside, is IT leaders are ready to fill that gap. That's something that we hear loud and clear. And often they see themselves kind of as the logical owner of this orchestration. And they're asking for executive sponsorship and alignment so they can implement AI with, again, the right guardrails, the right visibility in order to have the right and real business impact.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really interesting. Any other big surprises in the study?
No, I think I just said a mouthful there, but I think, when we talk about the connective tissue, and we look at the landscape of how workflows have changed, I think there's a lot of really good, supporting data and how important, orchestration, is in any enterprise and organization, and not just orchestration, but having the right levels of governance and auditability. And so, it's something that, again, I think is validated, in the research. So again, I want to encourage everyone to check it out.
Okay. Yeah, and just a quick reminder, that's over in the docs section. So be sure to grab that. You mentioned visibility gaps between IT and the board. What are some practical strategies that you've seen work that to maybe close that gap and elevate IT's strategic contributions?
Scott, I thought you were going to ask me about what doesn't work, but all right, let me take my best shot at this.
All right.
Yeah, so practical strategies that I've seen work. This really came through. Again, I'm gonna lean in on the research. We saw that 40% of IT leaders say a lack of business visibility into IT's contributions is what's holding them back at the board level. And I think a big part of that is because IT has historically measured success in things like in technical terms, uptime, ticket resolution, system performance. And, whereas the board, and I mentioned this earlier, they're focused on things like growth, risk, and ROI. So it's really kind of a reframing and kind of refreshing how you're looking at the metrics and the things, that you're capturing, and any type of metrics that you're putting in front of the board and or senior leadership, in order to find things that really resonate with them. And from an IT practitioner perspective, it's swapping things like system availability for downtime during customer hours. That's something that's important, right?
Yeah.
And highlighting things like hours lost to access delays, instead of just ticket closure time. It took us this long to close tickets. It's
Right.
make it meaningful. And again, same work, just a different way that you're framing it up.
No. Yeah, it's a really nice way to put it. Any other strategies come to mind?
Yeah, we're having a lot of conversations around strategy these days, but I would say, and I mentioned this earlier, but really another tactic would be embedding IT leaders into cross-functional planning cycles, and don't wait for the business to bring you a request. Really get ahead of it. Now is the time. Especially with generative AI and all the things that we're seeing with agentic AI and agentic workflows, agents, all terms that can be overloaded and mean different things. But I think we kind of level set on those earlier. But I think it's when IT is part of shaping the strategy and not just executing it, the value is way more visible. And I also tell this story regularly. Whether it's through dashboards, executive briefings, or quarterly updates. Make sure that and if you're working in IT, you're showing how it's driving outcomes that matter to the board. Highlight wins. And if you don't have a board, make sure you're highlighting it to your leadership, right? But highlight the wins. Also surface risks early and often. And that kind of transparency builds trust and really elevates IT from being a service provider, back to the keeping the lights on reference, to really a strategic partner. And so ultimately it's about proactive alignment and narrative ownership. And the work is already happening, closing the visibility gap, about making sure that it's seen, understood, and valued at the highest levels is important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really interesting concept about embedding IT leaders into some of those cross-functional teams in those planning cycles. I can see how that would really bring a lot of value. What are some early indicators that CIOs can look for to know that their AI orchestration strategy is gaining traction inside the business?
Yeah, this traction, can be really hard to measure in the early stages. And especially when you're moving from a pilot to something more, systemic, and looking at moving things, into production. But there's some clear and early signs that AI orchestration strategy and what that strategy is really starting to take root. I'd say first, you'll see more cross-functional pull. And if teams outside of IT start coming to you with ideas for how AI can improve their workflows, that's a really strong sign. And it means that they trust the approach, they see the value, and they want in. I'd say second, that you'll notice acceleration without chaos. And there's a lot of chaos right now, don't get me wrong. But in other words, the more processes that are being automated or assisted by AI agents, but what we'll see is governance is keeping pace. And you're not getting surprises around data access or rogue tools that are popping up. And you're seeing consistent, auditability, identity enforcement, and policy adherence. I think with very large enterprises, you see these very large governance boards that are tied with legal. And a lot of times these processes can be quite slow, but it's really because they're wanting to make sure that they're getting things right. I have seen things speed up a little bit over time as companies kind of evaluate like the terms and conditions and different language that different companies and the AI that they're bringing to bear. I'm seeing that move a little bit faster. When we first several years ago, when kind of OpenAI hit the scene and sent everybody scrambling, I could see it take upwards of a year to get through a governance board just to start using our technology, even in a proof of concept or pilot setting. So I'm seeing things, really make a lot of change there.
Yeah, you mentioned language. What about in terms of language? Like what are you listening for?
There's a lot of different signals, that I'm listening for. I definitely see a shift in language. I think when business leaders start talking about orchestration, and I've used that term I think quite a bit throughout this webinar. And guardrails is another one, alongside outcomes, things like speed or efficiency. That the strategy is starting to stick. It's not just about deploying AI; it's about doing it in a way that aligns with the business priorities and the risk posture of the business. I think finally, I'd say that one other big one would be measurable outcomes start showing up again, kind of going back to the board or senior leadership meetings, in terms of what's being reported on, whether it's reduced manual work, faster decision cycles, or improved accuracy in key processes. When AI driven wins start hitting KPIs, that's your proof point. And so, watch for pull, governance maturity, shared language, and business outcomes. If those are showing up, chances are your orchestration strategy isn't just in motion; it's gaining some traction.
That's really interesting. So, what do you think that AI success will look like 2 to 3 years from now in a high performing organization?
I'd love to turn that question around and ask you that, but I'll spare you. I think it's another great question. All enterprises are looking for AOI. There's a lot of pressure for return on investment. With any AI related initiative. I think 2 to 3 years from now, I think AI success in high performing organizations, it's not going to look like more tools, and it's going to look a lot more things like alignment, more trust, and more measurable outcomes. I think many organizations, we all know, are still in the pilot phase. They're experimenting with isolated use cases. These often, don't have a clear path to scale or governance. And that's another big thing that everyone's trying to figure out. And in contrast, I think the leaders 2 years from now who will have AI fully embedded into business workflows and not sitting off to the side. It won't be kind of a quote unquote AI project. It'll just be how work gets done. And that's where I'm really proud of a lot of the work that we're doing here at Times and how we've approached making our AI agents a first class citizen within our orchestration and automation platform. And now we're talking in terms of intelligent workflow automation. And I think we're really poised to continue to scale with our approach.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, kind of, from that Times lens, what do you think will be different from today?
I think a few things will look different. I think orchestration it'll be much more invisible, but everywhere. And I think AI agents and deterministic workflows will be tightly integrated, coordinated across teams, and governed automatically. I like to say automagically. You'll have audit trails in place, policy enforcement, human checkpoints, and that's the new buzzword of today. Human in the loop, is gets talked about a lot. And those checkpoints, with humans, they'll be built in, not bolted on in an afterthought. And again, I think platforms like Times, we've made human in the loop a first class citizen, in addition to our agentic capabilities in the platform. I think IT will be a strategic hub. It won't be a back office function. And I think it's pretty cool to see this change, where, again, we talked about keeping the lights on or system availability. IT now really has some really powerful keys to the kingdom of AI in terms of being able to enable or to toggle on or off, different features, functions, modules that have, AI and agentic capabilities. And so I think that CIOs are going to continue to lead these cross-functional orchestration strategies, connecting security, data, ops, and business outcomes. They're going to sit at the same table, as the CFOs and CIOs shaping enterprise strategy, not just being the enabler of it. I think AI outcomes will be trusted and tracked, and there'll be really clear accountability for every agent-assisted decision. And this is something at Times that we've taken a very thoughtful approach to in terms of, really being transparent and how our agents are thinking and how they're reasoning, why they're making, the decisions that they are in the order that they are.
Yeah.
And, I think that employees will know how and why AI is acting and trust that it will come from transparency and control and not just from a performance standpoint. And I think last is just change management will be a core competency, and organizations that succeed won't just roll out AI. I think they'll bring the business along with them, like we've discussed, and that means reskilling, which we're seeing in spades, and redefining roles and turning AI from a point solution into this shared capability across teams. I think can summarize that and in short say, AI success is not going to be about, who built the flashiest model. And we know that, it's been quite a race to the bottom as we look at like the costs of, input and output tokens and how, the different hyperscalers and other organizations are kind of pricing their models when they roll out, new models, and how prices, go down for older models, et cetera. But it's going to be about who orchestrated the most value safely, at scale, and who aligned, the people, process, and the platforms, to make all that happen.
Yeah. Well, that's a really positive and encouraging spot to sort of leave this portion of the conversation. I really like that vision of how AI can be integrated and everywhere but invisible. I really like that framing, and with the reskilling opportunities and the opportunity really for IT to become more of a central strategic player, maybe than it has been. Let's jump into a couple of audience questions here, because we've had quite a few roll through. This first one comes from Paul, and he's asking, how will the role of CIO change if or when AI is used in more strategic and planning roles, especially autonomously in day-to-day work? Is it more or less traditional CIO role, a C-level AI supervisor, or something else? I think you touched on that a little bit, but it would be interesting to hear, your take on what the CIO becomes.
Yeah, it's been interesting. For me, wearing different hats where I've worn both kind of a CTO hat as well as a CIO hat. I kind of I mentioned and touched on CTOs typically focused on building whatever product and finding that working with product and engineering to find that product market fit,
Yeah.
where you're building whether it's a platform, whether it's an application that you're rolling out, whether it's to internal or external users, where the CIO has been responsible for kind of figuring out what are all the systems that we need in place to kind of run the business. And with the advent of AI capabilities that we see being enabled in all of these different IT systems, it really kind of shifts the narrative from the engineering or CTOs like building the latest and greatest and coolest things with the latest and greatest technologies. We're really seeing that seeing those technologies as part of these systems that the CIO and applications that they're managing. And I kind of mentioned that they really kind of have the keys of the kingdom, and I think are at the forefront of really understanding what the benefits are of turning those features on or off, or using a mixture of those, and being able to be judicious. But they're really at the forefront of being able to be the voice of what these features are. And as we talked about KPIs and different metrics, tying these new capabilities to metrics that are of interest to leadership and as well as at the board level. So I really kind of see this swing to where IT is I don't want to say it fell out of favor, but it's really becoming sexy again, so to speak, because there's so much new capabilities that AI and potential that it's offering to get productivity gains, whether it's from the knowledge worker, whether it's from developers. And I think the CEO is front and center in terms of being at the helm of making decisions of either enabling that technology or procuring that technology and bringing it in-house. And so I think it's a little bit of a power shift, I think, and visibility in terms of how important the CIO's role is in making these decisions.
Excellent. And Paul, appreciate that question. Another question, you talked a little bit about some of the risks, and Ned has a question about that. Ned's wondering, how can security leaders effectively protect sensitive information and critical data while driving alignment on the risks, the principles, and controls that should govern the organization's use of AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at times, we're fortunate. We got our start in security, and what we found is that our customers, in terms of being able to orchestrate and automate a lot of their different security use cases, whether it was around phishing or threat intel, the list kind of goes on and on. And we've seen that kind of bleed over into IT leaders seeing that, we can automate, and orchestrate any process, kind of within our platform as well. It's kind of given us, a different lens. But, I think that security leaders really, can effectively protect sensitive information and critical data while driving alignment on AI governance by implementing, a holistic and proactive strategy that combines technical controls and going back to governance, like a very robust governance framework. And this approach recognizes that AI introduces unique risks beyond traditional cybersecurity threats. And I touched on a couple, but data poisoning, adversarial attacks, DDoS attacks, and bias. And there's a lot of things that are happening right now, kind of in if we look at things like what NIST is doing and their AI risk management framework that can help guide these efforts, and looking at some of those core functions, governing, mapping, measuring, managing, and really providing a more structured way to address AI risks throughout the entire life cycle. I think we're seeing a lot happen there.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, Brad, just before we wrap up here, if people want to learn more, or figure out what their next steps are for, for automation and, and bringing AI into their processes, what do you recommend?
Yeah, that is a very, very good question. And, again, I know I thanked everybody. I want to thank everybody again. I think there's some really great questions. Want to encourage everybody to follow up. You can hit me up outside of this webinar. You can find me on LinkedIn. Don't think there's a lot of Rumphs out there, but, if you're interested, I want to point everybody to the full Forrester study. And it should be linked in the Docs tab that you see up top in the right hand of your side of your screen. And if you're evaluating how to scale AI safely and drive measurable outcomes, again, we're super happy to walk through orchestration patterns that we're seeing succeed in both the security realm as well as in the IT operations realm. And I want to emphasize that heavily as we continue to really grow our footprint in the IT operations space. And you can also explore Tines and how teams compose deterministic agentic workflows with the right guardrails and audibility at Tines.com. We make it very easy for you to spin up your own Tines tenant. And then we've got some incredible boot camps and Tines University that you can go through all at no cost. And I think it would help really help everyone take a lot of what we've talked about today and put that into practice and have a much better understanding of how we're looking at the entire workflow landscape, again, from human-led to rule-based or deterministic to agentic workflows. You'll be able to get a lot of really good information and education on our approach to that at times.
All right, excellent. Well, Brad, this has been really an enlightening conversation for me. I think based on some of the comments from the audience, for them as well. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Everyone have a good rest of the week. Thanks, Scott.
All right. Well, I'm going to let Brad go here, and we'll take care of just some final pieces of business. So before we get to the prize drawing, we do have one quick favor to ask of you all today. So Arena is opening up a short survey that we'd really appreciate if you could fill out. This is for those of us on the IT Pro side. We just want to know how we're doing, what y'all like and don't like about our sessions, and just want to make sure we're meeting your needs. And the results of the survey will affect how we deliver these events for you in the future. So we'll give you all just a minute to fill that out. And while you're doing that, I'll just mention a couple of things just to reiterate what's in the doc section here. Just before we wrap up, kind of your last opportunity to grab these resources, at least from here. There's that Forrester study is there. There's the blog page about the Forrester study. There's also that link to start building things with Tines on the free account. To kick the tires and see what you can do with automation and building an AI in your processes. So please check those out here in the last minute. Just get those tabs open. And finally, it's time for our prize giveaway. The winner of today's $250 Amazon gift card is Joseph Donatucci from Pennsylvania. So congratulations to Joseph. As always, we'll be in touch about claiming your prize after the event. Well, with that, on behalf of the IT Pro team, I want to thank Tines for making this event possible. And once again, a giant thank you to Brad Rumph for just a super interesting chat. Big thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today. Special shout out to those of you who asked questions and engaged in the chat. It was great having you all here for this IT Pro event. And we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a fantastic rest of your day.